Hey, you are listening to the Post-Burnout Growth podcast with me, Ali, and my friend Avril. And today's podcast is all about visioning. So, want to find out more? Let's dig in. Hey, Avril.
Hey, Alison, it's good to be here and welcome to our listeners of the Post-Burnout Growth podcast. How are you today?
Good, good. Trying to stay toasty. The temps are falling out there, or the mercury's falling. So, yeah, you would think being Scottish, I would be uh, able to cope with this weather, but no, alas, no, I've got all the heating on that you can imagine.
Mhm.
What about yourself?
Hmm. Well, I'm enjoying cold weather. I'm originally from India, so for me, every year is the novelty of being able to enjoy this weather and feel cozy. It just, yeah, I'm always up for it. Um, you introduced us to the topic for today's conversation, in terms of vision or visioning. So why don't you kick us off with what does that mean to you in the post-burnout growth world, and why might our listeners be interested in starting to think about that?
Yeah, when you're in burnout, I think vision of anything else other than your current reality kind of evaporates.
Mhm.
Um, and you're kind of existing from day to day and you're trying to survive and you're trying to keep going. But as you perhaps, as I did, recognize that, there's some serious things going on here that I really need to pay attention to that are calling for me to take some action. And post me taking that action to arguably get myself into what I might call more of a steady state,
Mhm.
um, then it's at that point because perhaps I have brought myself into a place of regulation, of steadiness, of increased vitality, a sense of energy and well-being that visioning for yourself, for your life starts to kind of open up, and starts to, client of mine uses this word, so forgive me, but starts to bake your noodle. So it starts to get the cogwheels in your brain turning, going,
Sure.
okay, so I feel better now. What now?
Mm.
What does this mean for me? We're such mean making machines that,
Yeah.
our brain's always doing this future prediction. Um, but instead of doing it from a place of survival and fight
Mm.
and flight or freeze or fawn, we are actually using another part of our brain that actually lends itself to being creatively powered, from a place of, I'm going to say, a place of wisdom,
Mhm.
that is inherent in all of us when we give it space to breathe, and a place in all of us when we are in a place of calm. And that visioning piece for me was like, okay, I feel like I've made some headroads here. I'm moving through and perhaps out of a very unhealthy way of being and living that I've been in.
Mhm.
Um, now what do I want for myself? Because I know I don't want to go back there. I know I don't want that to repeat. And so it starts to become really kind of front and center around how do I create a life that's different, that's better, that keeps me in this steady state. So those are the first things I think when I reflect on it now. And I burned out twice, and I didn't realize I was burning out. It was only the severe illness that made my body shut down that I was like, oof, it's like a big pay attention, red light, flashing light kind of thing. But I think I don't want to say it's an awakening because that might sound a bit trite or what have you. When, we're coaches and, you hear this language a lot, but there is a kind of stirring in you that you start to just become aware of things that perhaps weren't in your sphere of consciousness before because you were in that burnout, fight, flight, exhaustion, dejected, disengaged, joyless place. So that vision kind of almost makes me think of an Olympic torch, and it kind
Mm.
of becomes like a beacon of hope for you for something that you can not only create but build upon. I don't know how. What's your experience with vision in regards to post burnout growth?
Thank you for sharing everything you've shared. There's lots of different pieces and strands in there that were part of my journey through burnout and into post-burnout growth. But one of the first things I remember was it would take me a fair while before I could get into a place of starting to even think about a hopeful future because burnout was so severe and so face to the floor. Um, that idea that there was a life after or there could be a different future after seemed so alien in those moments. I just want to acknowledge that as well for anyone who might be listening and feeling like they're in that place where sometimes things can feel a bit desperate or when I make it through this experience, what's on the other side of it. um One of the questions I've or reflections rather that I've heard very often when I'm having conversations with clients or potential people who are giving me feedback in terms of their own experiences of burnout is the reflection that keeps coming up is this all there is? Is this
Mm-hmm.
all there is for me? Is this it? And there's definitely that sense of like a sense of hopelessness, a loss of hope um in that. So it would take me a fair while when I was through some stages of recovery and was able to come into a much more, I want to use the word, my health was in a better place physically with my mental health in order to then start to even consider what does the future look like. Um, there were some things that you said about, not repeating things. I think that for me was very clear. There was no going back, and that still is true for me now. There is no going back. The old baseline didn't work. I know we talk a lot about resilience in the self-development and self-growth world, but as human beings, we rarely bounce back. We bounce forwards, and every time we are uh, encounter a moment of crisis or adversity, whether we acknowledge it or recognize it or not, we don't go back to an old baseline. We are changed somehow fundamentally through that experience when we find a way to move forward. So I learned very early in my journey that the vision was going to have to, it would probably look, and it does, look completely different from the life I had before. Um, I know you touched upon the term awakening. It might feel trite, but if I was to also come at it and I'm speaking for myself here from a spiritual point of view, it's definitely how it felt. And crafting that vision when I was in burnout was a lot more fueled by what does this person I am becoming need or want as I move forward? So if there is that clarity around this, these patterns cannot be repeated, or I'm aware that certain ways of being and doing have led me here, what is it now that I have to consciously and want to consciously choose to do in order to have this brand new future? Because it's we many of us might be familiar, for instance, with creating vision boards, or there are many exercises on the internet, or we might have done this with our mentor or coach, where you are led through a guided visioning exercise. Um, and sometimes it can feel, and I want to acknowledge that it can feel hard to connect in with those feelings, those uplifting, positive, resourceful feelings of like, yes, when I'm on this side, I'm going to be doing all of these different things. My life is going to look different. My work or my career is going to look like this. Um, but I want to acknowledge that sometimes it is burnout for me, at least, it was a huge point of awakening. It was a huge point of reckoning. It was like, what is going to happen now? Because the past cannot be repeated. It is not a place I want to live in again.
Mm.
Um, and the experience for me was so severe that it took me 2.5 years to fully get my health back on track, but also to become, to feel like I could reclaim and regain some parts of my life that had to be put in part because of burnout. So, um, yeah, that a lot of the things that you've shared definitely resonate. I also want to talk about, the when you touched on, this the vision being creatively powered by wisdom. Um, burnout was for me that moment of stopping, full stop, and
Mm,
going, what is it that I need to be listening to here within myself that has probably always been here, but I have been ignoring it, or I have been rushing through, or efforting or hustling in my work life or everywhere else, where I have not stopped to listen to what I need to be, honoring, recognizing. It might be, for instance, I'm at, the bottom end of all of my energy. There's just nothing
mm,
left to give. Or it's time to consider different ways of working or different ways of being. So, yeah, I just wanted to sort of acknowledge for our listeners that if you hear the words vision or visioning, and if you are in some of those early to mid stages, maybe even later stages of burnout, um, Ali and I talk about this very frequently. None of what we're sharing is a side hustle or a new project to start while you're in burnout. It's the listening to what's inside, if you're connecting back into the wisdom, and from that place coming at, so what does my hopeful future look like? What do I want to be doing? What do I see myself doing? What am I excited about? And it's in the small and little and ordinary and everyday that we sometimes can tap into that wisdom, rather than having the
mm,
big milestones, the big promotion, the big next big adventure. So that's where sort of, the piece around vision has felt for me, Ali.
mm. Yeah, no, again, you probably saw me head nodding there about lots of elements that you've said. And I guess I'm kind of curious, and might be quite interesting as well for any listeners, is often when we're visioning, we kind of need to have an awareness of where we are, what's our starting point.
Mm,
And you touched upon what am I going to consciously choose and who am I being? And you talked about that future state, that preferred future.
mm,
Um, what, looking back now, would you say was your kind of from and to? And I asked that question, I'm really conscious that's probably not a simple question to answer with a real quick binary black or white answer, but just
mm.
from a sense of what was that start point and what was the visioning sort of goal, and how would you know, or how did you get a sense that you were actually there? Because I know I've just asked you like multiple questions, but bear with me. But there's this thing of that you've sparked in me by listening to you, is around this fact of often we don't recognize where we are until we're looking back
Mm,
to go, oh, I've moved, I've traveled, I was there, and now I'm here. And
yeah.
that, when I say that, I'm thinking about the conscious choices, the
Mm,
intentionality, the who was I being then? And you talked about
mm,
patterns and behaviors and not wanting to repeat them. And then
mm,
it's like, okay, is it about completely recreating yourself? I mean, there's loads of questions here we might not be answering today, but to go
yeah.
back to my original question of where did you feel you were starting from? And that vision, where would you say it took you to? And what was it? Did you have a defining moment that went, haha, I've finally made it this vision? Maybe not 100% of it, because, like, again, like you said, it's not big things. Things don't happen in big ways all the time that are impactful.
Mm,
But it could be you've got a vision and you have 10% of it that you realize that comes to life. And it's, oh my
yeah.
gosh, that part of it's now, it's here. It's here in the
Yeah.
moment with me. I'm like that in the moment. I'm now being this way. I now have this new behavior and I have this new pattern, this new habit, whatever it might be. So
Mm,
again, I'm asking lots of questions because I want to just emphasize these are not absolutes, they're not linear journeys.
yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, how would you, that sort of from and to state, firstly, I guess?
Yeah. I think the first thing that sort of came to mind as you asked me the question was that I didn't do this work on my own. And I really want to sound that off, because when I found myself in burnout, when I was burning out, I had really good leadership mentors at work. I would occasionally at that point was seeing a therapist for what I thought was anxiety. It was potentially already early burnout. But when I was fully in burnout, it was the support of very highly skilled professionals who knew how to hold that container of space in terms of, right, where are you now, Avril? What is this moment for you? And what has this burnout showed you about where, the foundations are shaky, the energy is leaky, boundaries are porous? What is the current? And I think starting from what is can feel daunting. It can feel a bit scary, especially when one is running on fumes. But I did not do this work on my own because the more I thought, and I really want to share this, the more I thought about doing this work on my own, the more I did, I felt more isolated in the experience. I didn't have a clear sense of my own thinking. I couldn't check my own thinking because we are
Mm.
not, we can have self-awareness and things, but we cannot reflect back to ourselves and check our own thinking. That needs to happen with a skilled partner who can reflect those patterns back.
Mm.
So having, for the first part of the journey, having a really highly skilled trauma therapist and then moving on to a really highly skilled trauma informed coach helped me go, right, what's my starting point? What needs processing? What needs to be with? And therefore, so that's sort of from starting point. Um, if I'm perfectly honest, none of those starting point things was a surprise. I think for me, and I'm only going to speak for myself, was a lot of those patterns were probably already in play. I knew them. But I think, again, this can be some of the when we are in high paced environments, when we are in high pressure situations, when we think we need to act or behave constantly in certain ways, the ability to stop long enough to go, I need to address this. I felt like I just never got to that point. And I'm conscious I'm using that word never. It was just like being in a hamster wheel. So for me, from having those, that support systems to then going, okay, from now, here on, where do we want to go? I knew how I wanted to live. I knew where I wanted to live. I knew how I wanted to spend my day. So it really became bringing life right back down to what does a day in the life of me look like? If to come back to what I was sharing early in the conversation, if the question is this it? Is there all there is for me? Moving from that place of learned helplessness or even loss of hope and coming into, right, what's in my control here? What
Mm.
can I start to, what actions can I start to take in front of me that will solidify my sense of self-trust and my sense of
Mhm.
hope? It really was hour by hour, moment by moment. I am now 5, 6 years post, the big burnout, and I've also had PTSD. I share this transparently, but it took consistent work, working with the appropriate professionals, really taking on board that feedback, really building a life. It's not a checkbox exercise. It's not a to-do list.
Mm.
Uh, Post-burnout growth, the vision of the life, it really is from that inside out place. And yes, there will be
Mm.
some choices, not all of us can go, okay, I'm going to leave that job and I'm going to, I don't know, go do the whatever thing. Sometimes we have those moments where you go, oh, I'm going to jack this job in and I'm going to go do X. That is not always the opportunity available to us. It's not the realistic thing. Maybe we have to do certain things in order to keep, certain pieces in our life afloat. That's fine. It's still being able to hold on to your sense of, I'm moving towards this vision. I'm moving towards this life I want to have. And I also want to sound this off in terms of it's not just about your career. It's about the relationships, the quality of relationships, boundaries you have with yourself, with the world, the hobbies you love and nurture. There's just so many pieces. So I mean, when you're starting to think about these things and burnout, for me, the temptation was, oh, this has happened to me. I need to get back from sick leave and I've got to go right back into the job and I've got to throw myself back in. That was very much the draw. But over time and being with really good skilled professionals helped me go, this is a solid opportunity to put some
Mm.
new foundations in place and to live the life I really want to live. I've got to give myself the permission here. Um,
Mm.
how was it for you, Ali? Because what
Yeah,
was your from and to?
well, it's if I may actually, I'd love to touch upon some things that you brought up for me just listening to you there is I probably never thought I would say this back then, but there's so many gifts in burnout.
Mm,
And if you haven't ever had the chance to turn towards yourself with curiosity and learn about yourself
Yeah.
and learn about your conditions for success in life. You know, what makes you thrive, what makes you tick, what lights you up, what gives you energy. I mean, at the basic level, it's a wonderful opportunity, albeit it's come off the back of a very challenging situation. But it
Yeah.
nonetheless is, as you beautifully conveyed, it's an ongoing journey
Mm.
that isn't best done alone. I don't know anybody who can really do it alone for all the reasons of our humanness that we must travel together on that
Mm.
post-burnout growth journey. And so it allows us that opportunity to partner with others. And it's kind of a beautiful unfolding of discovery, as well as part of the ongoing journey of recovery. And I just hadn't thought about it quite like that until just listening just now to you. And I kind of think that's quite important because you mentioned a word about hope. You said loss of hope, and you talked about learned helplessness. And just in the post burnout reflection, if I was to leave the listeners with something to consider today, is it can seem pretty bleak, and
Mm.
there's no doubt about it. It's very multifactorial. It's very personal, your burnout journey. It's not one thing, one time, one size fits all. And I think you and I have chatted about this quite a lot, that can sometimes mask that we're actually even heading towards or that we're in burnout. Um, but this is in many ways something that in hindsight I actually feel grateful for, because it's a deepening of, I mean, I've been doing personal development work since 2003 with my first coach. And we're almost in 2025. So that's been a wee while. And that journey's never stopped in terms of the personal development. But I think it's because of our challenges, is because of the adversities that we experience, that we get to know ourselves better, that we get to experience that unfolding, that we get to partner in lovely relationships with others who can walk side by side with us. And it can sound like, again, if somebody's listening to this and going, oh, that sounds all lovely and hey, life is all about what you give meaning to. And I think, based on my own experience, I would say that when you have a sense of yourself and your truest essence, I don't know many things that are any more empowering, in terms of how you then, as to your point, show up for yourself, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with others, how you relate to life, how you relate to situations, how you relate to creating that new vision for yourself.
Yeah.
Um, and it's kind of like the silver lining, although you'd prefer not to have gotten there through burnout.
Mm.
But yeah, I just felt the need to share that because of what you were talking about.
Yeah.
That we can have this real sense of it being a very dark place. How can I possibly come up with a vision, like, from this starting point back to that
Mm.
conversational question of where did you start from and where did you move to in that post burnout growth journey? And I think for
Mm.
me, I've probably answered your question about that in a roundabout fashion, as I always do. Forgive me, I'm always thinking out loud.
You're good.
But I think the answer is the from and the to was the burnout fundamentally shone a light on beliefs, patterns, relationship with self, self-image, relationship with others that had been learned patterns from childhood, from experiences under the container of me not knowing anything different. You only know
Hmm.
what you know,
Yes.
and the things that we know we deem normal because they're familiar. And this
Mm.
burnout gave me the opportunity to go, wait a minute here, whilst these are the patterns that I've enacted over a long period of time, they brought me to this place of burnout. And I don't like this place of burnout. And so it
Mm.
sharpens your focus, like a lot of big life events do, to go, actually, I don't like this. Okay, so what do you want instead?
Yes.
And for me, my vision would, unsurprisingly, not be hugely different from yours. My biggest one was I wanted to move to a place of vitality. And I deemed that if I got myself to a place of feeling greater vitality in general, because we all have ups and downs, it's not all up and it's not all down. Life's a bit of a wavy curve. But if in general I could say, actually, I'm much more, I'm much fitter, I'm much stronger, I'm healthier at a baseline because those foundations matter, then anything else that I wanted to pursue in life would become attainable. And
Mm.
I think that brings me back to the biggest, big thing that really kind of almost whacked me in the face in both burnouts was that if you don't have energy, it's not, oh, I'm a bit tired, but if you literally are out of juice altogether, just trying to do the everyday basic things, back to you saying, what do I want my daily life to look like? And
Mm.
bringing it down to the smallest units of time or activity that we can carve in our lives, then nothing else is possible. I can have all the time in the world, but if I don't have the energy, if I don't have the vitality, nothing
Yeah.
else much is going to happen. And I think as much as we logically know that, until we experience it, we go, okay, time to change gears here.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so beautifully said. And I think this is what, from my biggest takeaway from our conversation today is no, of course, we don't want to learn these beautiful lessons through a very difficult, challenging, potentially debilitating experience. But what is the opportunity here? What is this experience of burnout inviting you to look at? What are those nudges? What is it encouraging to move towards? If from what Ali has shared, if certain patterns and certain ways of acting in familiar ways have led one to this point, then now what is the road through this, and what does life on the other side look like? We thank you for listening to our conversation today. Um, in our Unfiltered in the Moment Post Burnout Growth podcast, Ali and I share personal stories of burnout, recovery, and growth to inspire and comfort those of you who are on a similar path. We'll hope you will keep continuing to join us to find connection, insight, and renewed resilience. If you loved what you heard today, we would absolutely love it if you could continue to join our community. Do subscribe to this channel. And if you know anyone who would benefit from listening into this conversation and might have a light bulb or three, please feel free to share this conversation with them. So for today, that's all from Ali and me. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.